Hey guys, today we are working with Pigeon Pose, an awesome hip opener. This is a great pose because, hey guys, today we are working with Pigeon Pose, a great hip opening pose. Um, hey guys, today we are working with Pigeon Pose, an awesome hip opening pose. It's super common in yoga classes, so to really get a good base, a good foundation for the pose, so you are comfortable coming into this pose in a public class, is, let me just do this. Hey guys, so today we are working with Pigeon Pose. This is an awesome hip opening pose and it can be used in many different variations, from more of a restorative pose to more of an active back bending strong pose. But today we are just going to go over the basic pose that many of you see in class so you can really build a strong foundation. So when you do have the opportunity to use some variations, you still have a strong foundation in this pose. So let's hop on our mats and talk through some alignments and modifications. All right, so first I'm just going to demo the pose for you real quick. I'll come up starting from down dog. I'm just going to pull my knee forward, place it on the ground. My knee's kind of in between my hands, and draw my hips back. And then most commonly is more of a restorative pose where you fold your chest over your thigh. Okay, so that's pigeon pose. Another variation is you can keep you can walk your hands underneath your shoulders and kind of keep your chest upright. But today we really want to focus on the foundation, so really from the hips down. So one thing that may happen is if your front hip, so it would be my left hip, if if that hip is tight, your hip can kind of hover above the ground, and sometimes people roll down and open their back hip up. We don't want that. We want to keep our hips square forward, so our two hip points are in line with each other. So that's first alignment. Keep your hips square. The next thing, kind of going in line with our hips, is we want our back leg to be straight behind us. Again, so if you roll out, our leg can kind of shift to the side. So when you're first getting into this pose, just take a quick look back and make sure that your leg's not too far out from your hip, wider than hip distance. If it is, just take a moment to adjust and make sure you can see your 5 toes on the ground. Okay, so we got our hips square, we got our back leg in line, and now I like to always make my pose slightly active, no matter what I'm trying to work on. So with that, is I really want my legs active. So my front shin here, I'm going to actively press it into the ground so that same side hip is stretching but also engaged. And then I'm also pressing the back top of my foot down to engage my back leg as well. So my legs are active, so if I wanted to move into different variations, my legs are holding me up. If I let go of my leg activation, I drop out of the pose and there's real no added benefit. So nice strong legs, anchoring down into the ground. My back leg is in line with my hip, and my two hip points are square, are parallel to the front edge of my mat. Okay, so that's pigeon pose aligned with the alignments. So quick review: hip points parallel to the front edge of the mat. Back leg is not winged out to the side. It's not wider than your hip. You want to make sure the back leg is straight back. And then your legs are not passive. You're not just sinking into the pose. You want a little activity in that foundation, especially when you start to work with variations of this pose. So start early. Activate your front shin down into the mat. Your back top foot is firmly pressing into the mat. And that's really going to help develop a nice strong pigeon pose. Now for some modifications. So let's start with if you are in pigeon pose and your hip is a little extra tight, I'll switch hips. So let's say, you know, my hip is kind of, I'm here, and it's just super easy to drop that hip down and roll onto my side. So instead of that, take a block underneath that hip. So even if you do want to drop that hip and kind of roll open, you're dropping your weight down into the block, not down into the floor. And then that way you have support. And then you can come into any variation. You can still come down and fold without straining your hip or rolling out to the side. Okay. And then sometimes people's hips and knees, their joints, that version of a hip opener is just a little too intense. So I'm going to give you two other modifications that if you know your knees or hips just won't take that pose, or you try it and it just doesn't feel good, anytime you're in class, you can replace these two options with pigeon pose. The first one is Sukhasana. The main thing is, actually let me turn this way. So a lot of times when people are cross-legged, they kind of sneak their feet underneath their thighs and their shins are angled inward. There is we want to do this a little bit differently if we're trying to get a nice hip opening. We want to scoot our feet away from our hips to make our shins parallel to each other. And then we want to squeeze our knees together so that our feet are underneath our knees. So I'll turn this way so you can see this. So my shins, I walked my feet away from my hips so my shins are parallel to each other like railroad tracks. And then I squeezed my knees closer to keep my feet underneath my knees. And then you would just fold forward. And it gets into that same outer hip. Okay, so that's modification number 2. And then the other one would be lying on your back, kind of figure 4 on your back. So you would cross one ankle over your thigh. You'd bring that thigh towards you and hold the thigh as you bring your shin and knee towards your chest. Okay, so I'll turn this way real quick so you can kind of see. So I'm crossing my ankle over my thigh. I'm pulling my thigh towards me and holding my thigh with my hands. So those are the 3 modifications I suggest. So let's quickly review here the 3 alignments. We want our hips pointing towards the front edge of our mat. We don't want to be cockeyed in our hip points. Our back leg, we want to be straight back behind our hip. We don't want it too wide and we don't want it too far in. We want it straight behind. We want our legs nice and active to really give a nice firm foundation to our pose. Modifications, use a block underneath the hip if that hip's tight and you're still working on getting some deeper range of motion in there. If it's too stressful on your knees or your hips, you can come into the Sukhasana variation. Again, thighs or shins parallel, feet underneath your knees, or the version of you laying on your back, crossing your ankle over your thigh. All right, so if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me. I always love to help people in their practice. And I am offering a lot of Zoom classes. I have Zoom private sessions. I have an online yoga studio, so many options to practice with me further if you would enjoy. And all that information is below in the description with links to all that information. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Namaste.